I want to take you into the world of an artist called Bruce Asbestos, one that's joyous and fluorescent and steeped in English folklore. I've been following Bruce around for the past few months across a hyperactive schedule of exhibitions, fashion shows and public projects. And in this video, I want to take you along for the ride.
Was it filming?
Yeah!
Oh, fucking hell!
The first stop on my trip was to Bruce's studio at Primary in Nottingham, where he was screen printing a new body of work in Warholian fashion. We started by talking about the reasons he landed in Nottingham and how his experiences of running artist-led spaces there shaped his outlook on making work.
At the time there was only 2 courses in the UK that did a kind of broad-based fine art. A lot of them were like you do printmaking or you do painting. I kind of didn't want to even start with that premise. I wanted to start with an open book, if you like. So Nottingham Trent and Goldsmiths were only 2 courses that were doing it at that time, which seems like we're talking about the 1800s or something. So I decided I wanted to come to Nottingham. And what I didn't realise was how many opportunities there were to go elsewhere in the world. In my second year I spent 5 months in Japan, which was just life-changing, a kind of different level of pop culture. There was a lot of people talking about the black hole after university. I just hated this idea that there was sort of a built-in failure. It didn't fit with what I felt like. I was making art all the time, you know, I'm passionate about it. Why would there be this sort of like weird lull? There was a group here, or still a group here called Reactor, and they'd made a studio, and I was like, it's possible to survive in Nottingham after university. And then we got 18 of us together, and we all put in 50 quid a month, found a rundown studio, did that up, made some galleries in there. I think it was always that idea of let's get out there and do stuff ourselves. I always run galleries, so started with Moot Gallery, and then I run My House Gallery, and then Trade, which I ran since 2008 until a couple of years ago. So I always liked that in terms of thinking about that Bauhaus idea of you can do anything. I think when I started Trade specifically, there was a lack of artwork that I liked in the city. Slightly pre-Nottingham contemporary works that I thought were political and video and performative that just didn't seem to have a kind of outlet. We had Joseph Beuys's I Like America and America Likes Me. Really important performance art video, if you like, and I brought that into a tiny little space in 1 Thoresby Street. Because I moved away and then I moved back, when I got there, all the spaces were filled, apart from this old toilet that wasn't really used. And I was just like, well, I'm gonna have to make it work somehow. So I just gutted the toilet and made the first gallery there. And then as different people moved in and out, I moved the space downstairs, and then the whole ground floor became available. And I was just like, right, okay, time to step up. And it was like, became like a mini Kunsthalle. In a way, that was also the end of that space because it was too much, really. Then when I moved here, I also sort of changed my practice a bit. The nature of the space meant it was much more about painting.
Sometimes it's an excuse, isn't it? It's an excuse to work with a person. It's to just like do an exhibition with you, and then you're kind of in their presence and get like inside access.
I think I always wanted to work with artists that I thought that just had a bit of magic about them. I'd often look for artists that I thought were doing really interesting things but perhaps didn't have that massive visibility. That little bit of support might help them get somewhere different. I've always loved being in that it's just you and an artist and you're working out whether you should cover the shelves in like fake leatherette, because that's what the work needs.
Do you feel like it changed your practice because of the length of time you were doing that kind of stuff?
I think I found it quite difficult because you're running a gallery and then you've got a studio upstairs. I came to the realisation that if I wanted to make the type of work I wanted to make personally, then I would have to make sacrifices. I want to see what happens when you put all that energy into one thing.
This switch towards creating more art catalysed explorations into a lucid world of fairy tales that would mark the beginnings of increasingly iconic Bruce Asbestos characters.
I'm thinking about using some of my own iconography. I think in the past I've used things like Mickey Mouse or SpongeBob SquarePants. It came to a point where I really wanted to make something that felt like mine and from British culture in some way. So I started thinking about Shakespeare's witches and them stirring a broom. What's in this broom? Maybe it's Eye of Newt. What things could you put into that soup to make some new ideas? 11 eyes and a giant worm and a giant hand in the courtyard in Bluecoat. What new kind of brooms could we make?
The world that Bruce had begun to imagine was beginning to expand beyond his studio practice, and public sculpture was one bold way to take that work to a mass audience.
I always want my work to go out to the broadest audience possible. Like, I want to work with large museums because they have an existing audience and they're good at communicating art. When the Bluecoat talked to me about this idea that they wanted to have works that were visible from the high street, so bring people into the courtyard, I just thought that was a really exciting opportunity. And I knew that the large inflatables worked because I had it outside an art fair last year. There was one moment where this young girl came up to it and stroked it and then kind of waved goodbye to it. And I just loved that this small child just knew that it was for her. Something really interesting about PVC and about something that wobbles, that allows people to think, that's for me. Originally, I was looking at Kakoshi dolls, the Japanese dolls without any arms. They were traditionally made for kids, but really they're made for tourists. And I think there was something useful in that, and thinking about what position do you have when your culture is globalised. And I just like the idea of making my own version of that. I sort of think of them as love letters to these cultures. Is called OK Cherub because I wanted to point out the beautiful features of the existing building. And actually, if you walk very quickly through that space, you won't notice that there's 40 cherubs looking at you. I just love this idea that the sculpture could point out something in a space.
One of the most engaging things about Bruce's work is his ability to translate ideas into other creative worlds, one of which is his long-standing interest in fashion. And what better way to delve into the creative process than a behind-the-scenes look at his latest catwalk.
I guess I was making a lot of different paintings, but I knew that what I wanted to do was over here, this grand idea about art and going out into the world and people experiencing it. So I needed to make a scenario where I was really trying to get more towards this grand idea. I started thinking about catwalks. 5 years previous to that, I'd made a kind of catwalk in my bedroom, posted on Facebook, and someone was like, I'm really disappointed in you. And I just removed the video immediately because I knew what they were trying to say. They were like, you could have done a great catwalk, but you chose to do this kind of other thing. I think I had this idea that I wanted to do a catwalk and couldn't because I didn't have the finances, I didn't have the reach or the community or the support or the whatever. And then when I was thinking about changing my work, I just thought, the catwalk is sort of the perfect form. It brings different audiences together, kind of fine art and a fashion audience together, phrases of performance in a different way. You've got the history of the catwalk. I just love the kind of staging of it, the reveal. I either believe in this grand idea of art and bringing art to the people, if you like, or I can just make little paintings for myself and others.
The first one was at Nottingham Contemporary.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did you set that up?
Downstairs at Nottingham Contemporary, we've got these beautiful concrete walls. So I knew that I wanted to use that space. I'm just going to see what's possible. And at that time I was working as a technician and doing lots of things for Nottingham Contemporary in different forms. And I was like, I just need to ask. Because I'd run a gallery for so long. My thing was, don't ever ask a gallery. And I thought, there's literally not an organisation that I know better. I know everybody by first names, from the cleaner to the director. You've got to ask at least. I asked the person who was doing the kind of public programme at the time that I knew well, and she was like, oh, that's great because we've got the show with Linda, fashion influences in there. So it was just like the moons aligning. It just meant that I suddenly, would work with like 50 people to make that show. That switch was like, okay, I think this feels more like my big idea.
Right at the end, when you're all out, the cameraman will give you a thumbs up when it's time to turn around and come back into the green room.
Specifically around that time, there was lots of things to do with Brexit. I'd really felt that we'd really lost the argument because we'd not talked enough about what we would lose culturally. So I was thinking about stories that would talk about that sense of being a European identity. And the Hans Regrettable story is Germanic of origin, but it relates to the history of very odd European stories. The basis of the story was weird, it was pan-European, but also it had a lot of fun. A house can be made of sweets. You can find your way home using breadcrumbs. I just love that as a starting point.
Oh, so like no gap between.
Yeah. Doesn't matter how slow you go, really.
Got it. Yeah, so it's cookie.
important that it wasn't just a fashion show, because all I would then do is sort of make a bad version of what already exists. I wanted to make something that was kind of uniquely me. I was really keen that some of them were really well made and other ones were made out of cardboard and a vape. I wanted that uncertainty where it was like, it was not, oh, this is definitely an art performance and that's it, or this is definitely fashion and that's it, but there was like some sort of magic bringing those things together. It was a great way to have tested the idea, but then also it gave me inspiration to really pair other things together. I think it just allowed me to feel like there was a kind of future for that type of work.
What was your feelings about it, and then what was the reaction publicly?
Honestly, I cried. I was so overwhelmed by the sense of having completed this thing. I don't know why, it makes me feel a bit emotional now. I guess it was just having that feeling of like, you're either doing this thing or you're not. Either I'm making little paintings on a Sunday and that's fine, or I'm trying to do this much grander thing and that's fine. I had to sort of come to terms with my own values, which were very different from the work, I guess, at that minute. It was very emotional to kind of have completed this. It was nearly a year's work to kind of bring all that together, so it was quite like intense feeling.
Really happy. I may cry. Should we go to the pub?
Yeah. Like this. Congratulations. Well, yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, Brucey here. So it's one of those things, did sort of like loads of TikTok videos, and then I went on holiday and I haven't posted for ages. I don't know how you guys do it, but it's just a bit overwhelming having to post so often, otherwise you sort of become irrelevant. I just forgot to exist. I was just like having a nice time, not having to post anything. I'm back on it. It's well easy to be consistent when you haven't got anything on. With social media, when you're not doing much, it's really easy to be consistent. You can post 4 times a day. And I think it's difficult because it's that transition between being hobbyist almost to into like a professional world. Maybe you've got a team of people, or maybe you outsource. You know, I want to have a really good social media presence. I know that will be in the conversations of larger institutions that I want to work with. I just want to take the work out, and it feels like it hasn't functioned if it just stays in my studio.
Bruce's show at Quad was the culmination of various elements of his practice, from paintings and inflatables to the inclusion of a new game he'd been developing with some of his familiar characters.
The show at Quad is part game, part kind of sound making environment. I'm also making a series of large paintings that have the worm's face on in various abstracted ways. I wanted to test out the game in a non-iPhone way, whether you could make an immersive environment that was a game that people could play in an exhibition space. But I like the idea that you arrive in the space and you almost feel part of this art soup going on. I've always loved computer games, always been a part of my life, so I've always wanted to make a game. It's a media which is the most popular thing in the world, and yet always seen as slightly second best to like cinema. Never quite had the skills to kind of necessarily do it. Then I made the catwalk, and from that, you know, definitely learnt loads more about how these things work. I just think that's really exciting that art can go that far.
Watching all of these projects take place had kind of made me wonder, what was the wider goal in all of this?
I guess there's 2 goals. One is a show at the Mori Art Museum in Tokyo, and the other one is the Macy Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York. In terms of pop culture moments, I don't think you get a more brilliant sculpture celebration. It's not for a sort of smaller art audience, it's for the people in a way. This is like the start of it, working out when does something become a kind of icon. Like I was thinking about the rave smiley, you know, those sort of elongated eyes, the Nirvana one with the wobbly smile, Mr. Happy. They're all so close, it's like they're in the same family. What element could you change where suddenly it becomes an icon and not just a face? Who described art as the history of minor changes?
The last stop on my trail following Bruce was at the Artist Ed Space recent activity in Birmingham, and I had two final questions for him. The first one, what advice could he give to younger artists?
In terms of advice for younger artists, I would say the number one thing to do is get your values together, what you really are interested in and where you want to be and what you want to change in the art world. Using those values to make decisions, so you can say, oh, I'm going to apply to that residency because it's exactly how I want to see my work. Once you've got those really pinned down, that will guide you for the rest of your life. Your vision becomes really clear then. I think it's just such a useful thing that we don't often talk about. We talk about professionalism, but we don't talk about values.
So is your name Bruce Asbestos a legal name?
Yeah.
Did you change that, or was that your birth name?
I changed it about 12 years ago. I wanted a name that would stop me from becoming like a banker or something. You know, something that was so ridiculous it would be difficult to have a normal job, you know, a kind of safety catch if you like. But in the end I realised people who are running banking have like really odd names, like something Diamond his name was. You know, I think you can be a banker with an odd name. But I like this idea of the name comes through a bureaucratic system and someone's like, who is this?
Logo, subscribe, video. Thanks for watching.